Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss why it seems the Conservatives are simply not interested in trying to win the election. It's not that I think they want to lose or anything, although it's hard to rule it out at this point. It's just that they don't seem interested collectively in wanting to make it happen. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, how often have I heard various groups of Tory MPs say how important it is to be united? Disunited parties do not win elections. And it's true enough. So why don't they unite then? Well, a political party is comprised, of course, of those who compromise and those who rebel. Those who want to work for party unity will compromise with others to find that overlap on the Venn diagram that brings them and their voters together. Rebels also want the party to be united, but they insist that this is to be achieved by everyone else coming to their position and doing as they say. But normally, these groups of rebels are relatively small, and so they just sit on the sidelines carping and everyone else just ignores them. But what we have in the Conservative Party right now are lots of groups of rebels, and not really an overwhelming majority in favour of compromise. The end result is a disunited party. And the problem is that the rot has set in now as a result of a series of weak leaders who allowed these rebellions to succeed. The ERG were the model. They forced the entire parliamentary party, quite remarkably, to move to their narrow position on the fringes. So, of course, now they and other groups are all at it now because they've worked for them, it'll work for us as well. Of course, it's what all MPs not directly in power would like to be able to do, of course. You know, what stops them? Of course, every MP would like to be able to push their own agenda, to vote the way they want. What stops them really is the party system. And it is a good thing too. I know there'll be some people who will look at the downsides to the party system and well, actually, wouldn't it be much better if all MPs were free to make the best decisions for the people they represent? The problem is that nothing would then get done. Because what the people of York want is different to what the people of Oxford want. I mean, bloody hell. What the people on the north side of a town will want is completely different to what the south side will want. MPs would never agree on anything, much less the lots of legislation that needs to pass through Parliament at any one time, you know, even when we've got a genuine government. And can you imagine them ever agreeing a budget? So no, you have the party system. It has its downsides, obviously, as indeed does democracy itself, but it's a necessary evil in order to actually govern without having to resort to an authoritarian figure. Besides, the main problems with it are not so much the system as the media allowing the public to be lied to. But what's happened with the Conservatives is it's like the party system has broken down. There is still some discipline, but it is nowhere near as tight as should be the case for a party with such a healthy majority, especially for the Conservatives. You know, many of them have fairly malleable principles anyway, if they have any at all. And this is why Sunak may well believe that it's impossible to really mount a serious campaign to win the next election. Because instead of being a general directing disciplined troops in a coordinated campaign to thwart the enemy, whether that enemy be the opposition or just the British public, because the Tories make enemies of everyone, really, he is instead more like a crazy cat lady who's desperately trying to herd his clutter for a group photo. You know, when Sunak announced his 5 priorities or aims or pledges, whatever the hell he called them, they should have been focused on what his pollsters have identified as key issues to win voters back. Prime Minister, these are the messages you need to be hitting. Had he done that, the polls would look a lot healthier for him. Now, I've no doubt the Tories would still be in trouble. They'd still be behind Labour because at the end of the day, they've been in power for 13 years. They've given us sky-high energy bills, a knackered public sector workforce, an NHS that cannot actually guarantee treatment for people with even serious illness and injuries, and absolute shit being pumped into our waters on a literally industrial scale. Oh, and his predecessor crashed what was already a very flimsy economy. Now, it would be no easy task to come back from that, and he'd have had no chance of doing so in just a few months. But although he got a little boost in the polls after taking over from Truss, since then, there has been no headway. In fact, the polls have nosedived since then. As I discussed yesterday, in practical terms, you could argue he's not really polling any better than Liz Truss was right now. I mean, let's say Liz Truss would eventually have actually cost the loss of 300 seats, and let's say Sunak loses 200. Well, you might think, well, I mean, that's better. Sunak's done better then, hasn't he? He's retained an extra 100 seats. But that would still be a very humiliating defeat for the Tories. And from a practical point of view, no, they'd have no power at all to hold the Labour government to account in the next Parliament. They'd be wiped out as an effective political force for some years. They would barely have enough MPs to shadow every government minister. And the problem is, if you pretty much only have just enough MPs to shadow government ministers, and given that a good third of MPs in any party are usually a bit thick, that means you can't pick your best to find weaknesses in the government and start to win over the public again. Mind you, they don't really pick their best now, do they, when they've actually got some choice? But you look at these 5 pledges and they just don't sound like an election platform. During the election campaign, I keep saying parties can afford a small number of main measures. Some people say, well, why don't they push this? Why don't they push that? It's because they can only afford a small number of messages. They've got very narrow bandwidth to the public. They will have lots of policies and they will be listed in the manifestos, but they can only afford to really focus on a few of them during interviews or debates or their own campaign material. And how you decide which ones to pick, it's not based on which ones are the most important. It's how attractive they are to the swing voters you are trying to target in the marginal seats to win the election. None of Sunak's pledges do this, so let's go through them. First, halving inflation. Okay, tackling inflation would indeed be a good policy, but will it help in the election? No, why not? Well, first, to ordinary people, inflation is what makes what makes you have to stretch your budgets more. This halving inflation, is it going to ease the cost of living? No, it means it's going to get worse. Now, when Sunak is hailing victory sometime later this year, when inflation halves without having anything to do with him or his policies, people will then just say, well, hang on a minute, he's going on as if he's done this great thing. I'm finding it harder to cope this year than I did last year. So if he tries bringing it up a year later at the election, oh, I did this thing, it's not going to win him a substantial number of useful votes because voters will go, well, I didn't see the benefit. They haven't seen the value in his victory because they are still struggling. Second pledge, growing the economy. Well, same thing really. Everyone wants to grow the economy. Everyone will say, oh, yes, we want to grow the economy. But boasting about barely above zero growth figures is not going to win support from people who will wonder why their standard of living is still going down. Like, if people are getting along okay, then figures like, oh, the inflation's come down or growth has gone up, things like that, yeah, they'll win them. Oh, they must be doing quite well then. But right now, people are very sensitive to not only inflation, but economic growth as well. Their standard of living should go up if the economy is doing better. But it won't be. So this will fall flat as a vote winner as well. Third, he says reducing debt. Now, in theory, this sounds good, even though it actually isn't. During an economically turbulent times, you're not actually supposed to try and reduce debt. If anything, you need to increase it. But which is what he's doing anyway. But all he's going to do here is allow for Labour to point out just how much debt the Tories got us into. Then when Sunak tries to blame others, Starmer will point out how he just blames everyone else and never accepts responsibility. He's already found that a useful line of attack against Sunak, and he'll do it again. This is an absolute quagmire of a platform to try and stand on for the election. Sunak should be going nowhere near it. Fourth is tackling NHS waiting lists. Well, this would indeed be a vote winner if he could actually do something. But he's making things worse with his policies. And all he's really doing is waiting for it's like inflation. He's waiting for it to naturally come down through no help of his. He's waiting for the waiting list to come down a little bit this summer, as they naturally would, a little bit, nowhere near enough. But that's not going to help him again, because they're going to go right back up. Worse than ever, probably, next winter. Remember, he wants another winter before calling an election. He doesn't want an election this year, he wants it next year. Some even saying that he wants an election in autumn next year. I mean, I think that would be fairly insane. Because the winter NHS crisis these days doesn't wait for winter. It starts ramping up actually in summer. In autumn, it's already bad. and it was last autumn. Why wouldn't it be this autumn? Why wouldn't it be the following autumn? This is not going to be a position of strength for him. And he's not going to be able to get away with it by, making people think the NHS is safe in his hands by making grand promises. What's he going to do? Promise more hospitals? Yeah, they've done that. People aren't going to believe it. They didn't deliver. More doctors and nurses? Again, they've done that. In fact, they keep promising that, not delivering. And, there is no good time for an election. But if Sunak thinks he can use waiting lists, if he tries to go to the polls in autumn 2024, Labour are just going to, even if he went in summer, let's say he went in summer as it was coming down again, Labour will just point out, do you remember how he crowed last summer about how the waiting list went down, then they just exploded in winter again? Well, the same thing's going to happen this winter. It'll be easy to show people that the same will happen again. If Sunak is not going to do something practically to actually improve the NHS, then I think he's run out of road for the usual con job after he and his four predecessors have utterly knackered it. And fifth, the small boats issue. Do me a favour. Not only is this not an issue for a lot of swing voters, it's also something that either he will fix with a real policy or something he will allow to get worse. If he fixes it, then it's no longer something he can fight an election on. People vote based on what you're going to do, not what you have done. If he lets it get worse, people will think he's had enough time to deal with it, that it's only become a serious issue over the last few years anyway, coincidentally since Brexit, and there's no real point in giving him more time to continue failing. So none of these pledges help him win the next election. They exist to persuade his MPs to back him, not the public. It's not aimed at the public. The public's judgment is far away. That's why. If he gets his way, the public's judgment does not come for another year and a half. And maybe he doesn't even care about it when it does come. Whereas his MP's judgment is immediate. It's every time. It's every Sunday, in fact. We'll have to see what comes out in the Sunday papers tomorrow. He's constantly under threat. His MPs, if he really annoys them, could depose him in a week. But maybe he only wants to keep them on side. Maybe Sunak really, and I've suggested this before, maybe he just wanted his place in the history books. He just wanted to be Prime Minister. And a bit like some of his more recent colleagues, but maybe in his case he wanted to be, the first non-white Prime Minister. And he's got that now. Now he's just going through the motions so that he can lose his job at the hands of the public, which is, allows him to hold his head rather higher than being deposed by the baying hounds in his parliamentary party. Maybe he wants to be the first Prime Minister since David Cameron to actually leave office with some sense of dignity. Because if you think about it, the last three Tory Prime Ministers have all been deposed in quite brutal fashion by the party. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.